I bid you welcome.
To a new world of gods and monsters.
How do you like that, eh?
Even a man who's pure at heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the moon is full and bright.
I love dead, hate living.
It's a perfect night for mystery and horror. The air itself is filled with monsters.
To die, to be really dead, that must be glorious.
Well, Count Dracula.
There are far worse things waiting man than death.
And there were far greater things awaiting Bela Lugosi. With Dracula wrapping filming on November 15th, 1930, there were 3 months of limbo before the film premiered. And when the film premiered on Valentine's Day in 1931, how would audiences react to Universal's newest fright flick? The first talkie to boot. Bela Lugosi's life was sure to change. He would be a star. That meant Easy Street for the Hungarian thespian, right? The world was at his fingertips. All he had to do was reach out and grab it. Dracula would ensure Lugosi to be crowned as Hollywood's Dark Prince. The film was a massive success, ushering in the golden age of horror. The legacy that Dracula left behind is still being felt today. If it had failed, Universal may have passed on Frankenstein and other horror pictures. But today, there are countless monster movies in Universal's unique repertoire, and fans owe a debt of gratitude to the film that started it all. I'm Ian the Wolfman, and this is the Monster Archives. So, we know when Dracula wrapped filming, but let's back up just a bit to the middle of filming to see what some of the prospects of the feature were shaping into. The Stargazer columnist for Exhibitor's Herald World visited the Castle Dracula set and filed this report on October 18th, 1930. Bela Lugosi is playing the lead in Dracula. Lugosi is better fitted for the role, I think, than anyone in Hollywood or any other place. He is Count Dracula. I had lunch with him. He is not melancholy or doleful when not acting. He has an amazing sense of humor. He can laugh heartily. But when you see him in Dracula, you'll decide that he wouldn't smile at even Laurel and Hardy. Lugosi had made a believer out of one reporter. Even if some of his co-stars laughed at Lugosi's methods, as the film progressed, it was apparent that he was crafting a legendary, perhaps even supernatural, performance. The October 28, 1930 edition of The Film Daily reported that Universal is said to be highly enthusiastic about Lugosi's performance as Dracula, and the studio has signed him to a long-term contract. But this report spoke too soon. There wasn't a contract for Lugosi this early. Carl Laemmle still hated even the idea of the film. It was a point of contention between him and Junior, but Junior insisted, having full faith in the picture. Carl Sr. was reportedly even creeped out by watching Lugosi on set. That was sure to make Jr. all the more certain in the film. After viewing the initial cut of the film, Carl Laemmle reportedly said that the film gave him the jeebies and ordered it to be re-edited. Todd Browning was bitterly disappointed by the studio's 11th hour re-edit and claimed that his best work on the film ended up on the cutting room floor. The recut film seen today apparently introduces a number of continuity errors. This also points to rumors of an 84-minute cut of the film versus the current 75 minutes. As filming crept closer to completion, the studio waited to decide on how to market the film. Should it be branded a literary classic, an adaptation of a hit Broadway production, a horror film, a sexual romance? In the end, Universal would bundle it all together. Dracula is awarded the cover of the Film Daily's Sunday, November 9th, 1930 issue. This was just 4 days after Universal had taken home its Academy Awards for All Quiet on the Western Front. That film is mentioned on the cover, but the word Dracula is in giant, bold red letters with a strikingly accurate caricature of Lugosi as the vampiric count preying upon a sleeping, sexy woman that more closely resembles Lupita Tovar than Helen Chandler or Frances Dade. Following the title, it reads, "The story of the strangest passion the world has ever known." Both Senior and Junior Laemmle's names are noted as producers. The film is also noted as Todd Browning's greatest production. Lugosi's name is notably absent from the cover. The presentation is certain to tantalize potential audiences. Universal was at the top of their game. During the final week of filming, Universal featured small teasers in issues of the Film Daily, such as, "Dracula will get you if you don't watch out." Was it a blessing or a curse? The kiss of Dracula. On November 19th, 4 days after filming had wrapped, the Film Daily drops this bit of information. Bela Lugosi, as a result of his colorful portrayal in Universal's Dracula, is to have his name in larger type in all advertising on this thriller, which Todd Browning directed. It is expected that Universal shortly will star Lugosi. This jargon of the time meant that Universal was likely to offer Lugosi a long-term contract. With filming wrapped, Lugosi returned to his home in the heart of Hollywood just in time for the holidays. On December 13th, Browning recalled the cast and crew for a day of retakes and schedules another round for January 2nd, 1931. Dwight Fry and his wife Laura welcomed their son, Dwight David, into the world on December 26th, 1930. After the January day of reshoots, production is officially complete on Dracula. The film's final cost is $341,191.20, nearly $14,000 under budget. Now, focus would shift to the advertising campaign. There are multiple flashy and iconic posters believed to have been painted by the head of Universal's art department, Carolee Grosz. Like Lugosi, Grosz was Hungarian. Little is known of his life, and, as far as we know, there isn't even a known photograph of the man. Grosz oversaw the studio's advertising campaigns, contributing hundreds of his own illustrations and paintings. One of his earliest and most recognized posters is for All Quiet on the Western Front. The first theatrical poster for Dracula features the Count, preying upon a man, presumably Renfield, and a sailboat. The poster features a familiar tagline, the story of the strangest passion the world has ever known. While it's unknown who the illustrator for this specific piece is, many believe Gross, at the very least, had some hand in it. Unfortunately, at the time, film studios weren't known for offering full credit to illustrators, so many of these early pieces of art have no named artist to attribute them to. Fortunately, there are quite a few pieces that are known to have been painted by Carolee Gross. We'll focus more on the talented master artist in the very near future. He remains one of the most important creative persons that helped shape the world of Universal monsters and how the fans view them to this day. Universal's marketing and advertising campaigns seemed to hypnotize interested potential moviegoers. Here's an early 1931 publicity tagline for the film. Out of the cobwebby darkness of an age-old castle, heavy with dust of centuries, comes Dracula, the terrible, the fascinator, the destroyer, to roam the night for weird, wild, breathtaking adventures. The January 1931 edition of Motion Picture World has a piece by Gladys Hall entitled The Feminine Love of Horror. Bela Lugosi offers this in the feature. Women wrote me letters. Ah, what letters women wrote me. They hoped that I was Dracula. They hoped that my love was the love of Dracula. They gloated over the thing they dared not understand. It was the embrace of death their subconscious was yearning for. Death, the final, triumphant lover. Dracula was wide released throughout the United States on February 14, 1931, Valentine's Day, the perfect day for a romantic horror thriller. 2 days prior, on February 12th, the film premiered at Broadway's Roxy Theater, popularly known as the Cathedral of the American Motion Picture, complete with a stage show, Hello, New York. Motion Picture Daily printed a full-page ad, $73,781.95, a week's business in 4 days at the Roxy for Dracula, and watch for final figures. The total in its first 8 days at the Roxy was $112,319. Within 48 hours of its opening, the theater had sold 50,000 tickets, building a momentum that culminated in a $700,000 profit, the largest of Universal's 1931 releases. Newspapers reported that audience members fainted in shock at the horror witnessed on screen. This publicity stunt, shrewdly orchestrated by Universal, helped ensure people came to see the film, if only out of sheer curiosity. Bela Lugosi's reviews are astounding. The Film Daily notes, Bela Lugosi creates one of the most unique and powerful roles of the screen in this one. The Billboard reports Bela Lugosi is Count Dracula and gives a brilliant portrayal. New York Graphic prints, Lugosi is remarkable as the strange Count Dracula. On Wednesday, February 18th, Carl Laemmle Sr., who had been against the film from the start, takes a full page in the Film Daily. Todd Browning's Dracula is proving the sensation of the year. Wherever it is showing, it is setting new records and taking the people by storm. It is being dated by the best theaters in the world as fast as our supply of prints will permit. The people are simply eating it up. Laemmle adds, perhaps concerned that his initial apprehension toward the picture had somehow leaked. I knew it was good, but I didn't know it was that good, even after I had seen it in the projection room. Maybe Uncle Carl was just saving face. maybe he still wasn't a fan of the picture. But that seems unlikely, as Universal would amp up its horror picture production. The bottom line, of course, was money, and Dracula certainly made money. Dracula was fortunate enough to be featured on the cover of the Film Daily, once again on the Sunday, February 22nd, 1931 edition. A sweeping tagline read, "It draws like the very devil." Carl Laemmle and Todd Browning are named, while Lugosi and Helen Chandler are pictured as their respective characters. They remain nameless. It appears that actors may have had to pay for their names to be added on trades at the time, an expense, perhaps, Laemmle wasn't willing to fork out. Dracula is in bold red-orange letters with a subtext that reads, "Hand in hand with prosperity. That's Universal." Above the title reads, "A sensation at the Roxy, New York. A smash at Rialto, Washington. A sellout at Alhambra, Milwaukee. And now, biggest midnight show in history at Fox, Syracuse. Beats first Sunday, All Quiet on the Western Front." Universal is pushing for Dracula to be even bigger than its Academy Award-winning spectacle from the year prior. Nevertheless, in the March 12, 1931 issue, the Film Daily offered Bela Lugosi an official congratulations for his portrayal as Dracula. The trade also does the same in 1931 to such names as Charlie Chaplin for City Lights, James Cagney for The Public Enemy, the Marx Brothers for Monkey Business, John Barrymore for Svengali, Clark Gable simply for his own rising popularity, and Carl Laemmle Jr. for his array of hits at Universal. The film was generally well received by critics. Mordaunt Hall of the New York Times called it the best of the many mystery films, characterizing Browning's direction as imaginative, and Helen Chandler's performance as excellent. Variety praised the film for its remarkably effective background of creepy atmosphere, and wrote, "It is difficult to think of anybody who could quite match the performance in the vampire part of Bela Lugosi, even to the faint flavor of foreign speech that fits so neatly." Time called it an exciting melodrama, not as good as it ought to be, but a sheet type of mystery film. Still, not every review was positive. John Mosher of The New Yorker wrote, "There is no real illusion in the picture, and this whole vampire business falls pretty flat." Modern Sentiment notes the film correctly as one of the most influential of all time. In 1999, Roger Ebert gave the film 4 out of 4 stars, praising Lugosi's performance and Freund's cinematography. He noted the film's lasting influence and included it in his list of great movies. John Oliver of the British Film Institute credited the film with establishing the popular on-screen image of the vampire, and wrote that the cinematic horror genre was born with the release of Dracula. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 94% based on 48 reviews, with an average rating of 7.86 out of 10. The site's critical consensus reads, "Bela Lugosi's timeless portrayal of Dracula in this creepy and atmospheric 1931 film has set the standard for major vampiric roles since." In 1998, composer Philip Glass was commissioned to compose a musical score for the film. The score was performed by the Kronos Quartet under the direction of Michael Reisman, Glass's usual conductor. Glass said of the score, "The film is considered a classic. I felt the score needed to evoke the feeling of the world of the 19th century. For that reason, I decided a string quartet would be the most evocative and effective." I wanted to stay away from the obvious effects associated with horror films. With Kronos Quartet, we were able to add depth to the emotional layers of the film. The film was released with a new score on a special edition VHS in 1999. Universal's DVD releases allow the viewer to choose between the original unscored soundtrack or the glass score. It was released on vinyl by None Such Records in 1999. Glass and the Kronos Quartet have performed the score live multiple times during showings of the film. The legacy of Dracula is unparalleled. It, of course, led Universal to produce Frankenstein later in 1931. Universal became the leading studio for early horror films, but Dracula's story was just beginning. 5 years later, in 1936, Universal would release a direct sequel that picks up moments after the original film, Dracula's Daughter. A second sequel, though far less direct, Son of Dracula, starring Lon Chaney Jr. as the vampire, was released in 1943. The Count returned from the dead, played by John Carradine in 1944's House of Frankenstein and 1945's House of Dracula. Bela Lugosi would only officially play the character that brought him Universal fame again 17 years after the original film, in 1948's Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Christopher Lee would rise from the grave as a more bestial Dracula in a series of films from Hammer Studios beginning in 1958 and running through the early 1970s. Here's Lee's thoughts on Lugosi's portrayal. Anyhow, about the Lugosi Dracula, I was so disappointed. I absolutely had been waiting to see it for a long, long time. There are aspects of it, for instance, that I considered ridiculous. Dracula is played too nice at the beginning. Practically no menace in the character. There is no shock or fright in it. Lugosi's hands, too. He held them out stiffly, making him look like a puppet. His smile was not always sinister, either. Universal would remake the film in 1979, starring Frank Langella as Count Dracula, Laurence Olivier as Van Helsing, Donald Pleasance as Dr. Seward, Kate Nelligan as Lucy Seward, Jan Francis as Mina Van Helsing, Trevor Eve as Jonathan Harker, and Tony Haygarth as Milo Renfield. Like the 1931 film, the screenplay for this adaptation is based on the Hamilton Dean and John L. Balderston stage production. The stage play was revived in 1977, running for over 900 performances through January 1980. Langella had played the role of Dracula in the stage play, ultimately being nominated for a Tony Award. This film is noted for a more sensual presentation. He wished to create a different Dracula, stating, "I did not want to look like Bela Lugosi or Christopher Lee." In 1992, legendary director Francis Ford Coppola brought a new vision of Dracula to the big screen with Bram Stoker's Dracula. Starring Gary Oldman as Dracula, Winona Ryder as Mina Harker, Anthony Hopkins as Van Helsing, Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker, Richard E. Grant as Dr. Seward, Sadie Frost as Lucy Westenra, Cary Elwes as Lord Arthur Holmwood, and Tom Waits as Renfield. The film was a massive success at the box office. The film boasts a script close to the original novel, with some clear differences. Still, the film focuses on the supernatural, horrific, and monstrous elements of the story, with plenty of sensual romance to boot. It remains one of the most recognizable adaptations. Universal would revisit Dracula time and time again, with Van Helsing in 2004, Dracula Untold in 2014, Renfield in 2023, The Last Voyage of the Demeter in 2023, although it was only distributed by Universal, and Abigail in early 2024. It seems that the undead count truly will never die. The shadow cast by Lugosi's outstretched arms and cape is still seen today. So, let's get back to Bela and the post-release of Dracula in 1931. Lugosi was an overnight star. Sure, he hadn't made much money for his performance, but the world knew who he was. And not only was he a movie star, he was a sex symbol. The ads even attested to that. The Capitol Theater in Atlanta adorned its ad with a cartoon of a long-legged woman in a corset and stockings, her back arched, staring up at the towering image of Bela Lugosi above the title as if worshipping him. In Louisville, at the Strand Theater, there's a poster of Lugosi's Dracula hovering over Francis Dade's Lucy with the words, "Beware the kiss of Dracula, the caress that burns like a flame of fire." While many who worked with Lugosi, as well as many historians, have noted that the man had a massive ego, it's hard to imagine how the sweeping success of the film, positive press, stellar reviews, and sex sell he was receiving could cause anything but an ego. While the film explodes in the East, Lugosi and Universal awaited for the Los Angeles premiere. In retrospect, it's a bittersweet glimpse. Lugosi would never reach the heights of popularity and success as he did for Dracula. He would be typecast in horror roles and villains, red herrings and supporting roles for the remainder of his life. The film studios knew how to keep him in the palms of their own greedy hands. As much as he enjoyed the success that Dracula had brought him, he wished to leave the role behind for good. In a recently re-released filmed interview from right after the release of the film, the interviewer asked Lugosi,
Mr. Bela Lugosi, in other words, Count Dracula, I've often been wanting to ask you a question. Does it ever give you a nightmare when you play parts like that?
No, I couldn't call it a nightmare. I played a very long time. In the beginning, it was a rather interesting experiment for an actor. Later, I was afraid I get myself a little bit goofy. Now I'm glad everything is over.
This interview remained unseen since its release except for a single 2017 screening. It was found by historian Gary D. Rhodes, and its preservation funded by David Stenn, released online in July of 2024. And credit for the restoration and preservation of the clip goes to the Packard Humanities Institute. Thank you. For Universal, Dracula was a big money follow-up to All Quiet on the Western Front. But the Depression was still sucking away studio funds faster than Dracula could drain a victim. Universal temporarily shut down in the spring of 1931. During the hiatus, Universal executives began discussing the ideas of potential new projects for its new star, Bela Lugosi. Among the mentioned ideas were adaptations of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Edgar Allan Poe's Murders in the Rue Morgue. On Friday, March 27, 1931, also during the studio's shutdown, Dracula had its Los Angeles premiere at the Orpheum Theater. Bela Lugosi attended with his 19-year-old date, Lillian Arch. She regales Greg Mink with details decades later. It was a theater in downtown Los Angeles. God knows what it is today. I don't think it's the theater. It really wasn't a big deal. No ballyhoo, no nothing. In fact, the Orpheum Theater is still standing and operational today. It was renovated in 1989 for $3 million and is the most restored of the historical movie palaces in the city. In the 1990s, it hosted a revival of Dracula and Frankenstein, which would also have its LA premiere there. The film does well at the theater, grossing $21,000 in its first week. When Universal's fiscal year ended on Halloween of 1931, prior to the release of Frankenstein, the studio's profit was $615,786.64, largely thanks to Dracula. While Dracula only brought Bela Lugosi $3,500, he would receive immortality for his performance. Perhaps he wasn't awarded the recognition that he was so undoubtedly due until the 1990s, when Universal Monsters were released on home video, and MCA fully pushed for the celebration of the near-countless films. Today, Bela Lugosi is warmly regarded as one of the greats, an outstanding performer, patriot, and human being. Carl Laemmle Jr. is to be remembered for pushing hard to make the film against his father's wishes. And Todd Browning's vision, while clouded by the loss of his friend and colleague Lon Chaney, cements Dracula as one of the most celebrated horror films of all time. Still, Lugosi remains the most spellbinding aspect of the film. Even if one isn't familiar with the man, if asked to give an impression of Count Dracula, nearly every single person will enunciate like Bela Lugosi. If that isn't power beyond the grave. Author David Thompson notes in The New Biographical Dictionary of Film, released in 2004, Lugosi's acting was so florid and yet so macabre that only some fanciful notion of Hungarian mythology could explain it. He could be frightening in a way that other actors in horror never achieved, because he appeared to believe in the literal meaning of the films, and because it was possible to be persuaded that he himself was possessed. "I am Dracula." His first words were less introduction than assertion. But Lugosi's place at the top of Universal would last so very briefly. Amidst studio politics, differing opinions, pride, greed, and more, a rival would soon take his place. If Bela Lugosi was Hollywood's Dark Prince, there had to be a king. But before King Karloff was discovered, we have to talk about the other Dracula at Universal. You see, at night, on the same sets of the English-speaking version of the film, an entire separate cast and crew were creating a film that rivaled Lugosi's. In fact, many fans believe the film to be superior to its English counterpart, at least in technical terms. Join us next episode as we travel through the once-forgotten history of Universal's Spanish version of Dracula. This episode of the Monster Archives was written and produced by me, Ian Bates. For more on the Monster Archives, including scheduling updates and news, be sure to follow @Universal Studios Monsters on Instagram. And thank you for listening.